let's go with Ayn Rand's definition of philosophy. That's, I think, a good starting point. Okay, and Mrs. Rand says philosophy studies. Big problem there because you can study and not understand anything. Okay, I've covered that in the past. So studies is a bad word, but let's continue. Studies the fundamental nature of existence. Is that what philosophy studies? Existence? I thought physics was the study of existence, right? If you're going to explain something regarding something that exists, I think that falls under physics, not under philosophy. Okay, but let's continue. We'll get more and more deeper into that issue. Okay, nature of existence, of man's relationship to existence. Relationship to existence. I thought you define existence and then that's what exists if it meets the criteria of the definition. What is this nonsense about relationship to existence? Is she saying she's going to introduce an observer and make it subjective? What exists depends on man's relationship to existence? And again, I'll get deeper into this. It's just if you have something better to do, don't do it. Stick around and you'll learn something. In the realm of cognition, the special sciences are the trees, but philosophy is the soil which makes the forest possible. Very poetic and very nonsensical. What Ayn Rand is saying is that before you do any discipline, before you engage in any discipline whatsoever, chemistry, history, anything, you need philosophy. That's the soil on which all the trees are planted. And she kind of means by this that first you have to perceive, you have to be conscious, aware, you have to detect, you have to feel, you have to see, hear, maybe touch, smell, taste, right? All the senses. Okay? You got to smell God if you want God to exist. You got to taste Him. Okay? That sort of thing. Otherwise, He doesn't exist. I don't know about that. Is that how we determine that a magnetic field exists? By tasting it or smelling it? I don't know. And she says it's see, touch, but you can't see or touch a magnetic field. So we got a little bit of a problem with her notion that we're going to use the senses in some way related to existence. You know, it sounds like she's going to be very subjective about what existence is. And in that sense, she's no different than all of the other so-called philosophers throughout history, including all the mathematical physicists throughout history. Everybody thought that you prove existence by touching or seeing. And if you can't touch it or see it, it doesn't exist. That's essentially where we are today. And that's why, rational science had to change all that and say, no. We have to stop this endless chatter, this endless circular chatter. We have to define these terms so if you want God to exist, define the term exist and you'll know whether God exists. If God meets the definition of exist, then He exists by definition. And if He doesn't, He doesn't. It's just that simple. We don't have to introduce the observer and say, well, can you detect God? Can you touch God? Can you see God? We don't have to get into any of that. We just say, does God meet the definition of exist? Right? If God does. He exists by definition, not because I believe or stop believing. Okay? Okay, so, Ayn Rand, I think, starts on the wrong foot already there. Okay? The Atlas Society, she wrote a book called Atlas, let me get that light out of there. She wrote a book called Atlas Shrugged, and then as a result of that, her followers created a society called the Atlas Society, okay? And they pretty much are on the same boat. They put this for the word philosophy. Okay, this is on their website. So philosophy is a comprehensive system of ideas about human nature and the nature of the reality we live in. So again, they introduce existence, reality. Reality and existence, by the way, are synonyms. So whenever we use the word reality, real, being, they all mean exist. If you look up those words, you'll find the word exist in the definition. When you look up exist, you find reality, being, living. You find synonyms. We don't know what the word exist means because no one has ever defined it. But everybody talks about the existence of God, the existence of space-time, the existence of zero-dimensional particles, the existence of black holes, and nobody tells you what the word exist means. And everybody said, well, I know what it means. We all know what exist means. Exist means exist. Reality, real, right? And so we're back to synonyms. No, we have to define the term. We have to define it very specifically so that we can use it consistently in a discussion, in a debate. I need to know what it means to you, and you need to know what it means to me. Then we can talk sensibly. Otherwise, we're just talking in circles. We're not on the same page. Okay. These folks continue. Nature and reality we live in. It is a guide for living. Nature of existence? What does that have to do with a guide for living? Are they talking about a recommendation, how you should behave, how you should live, maybe how you should vote? Are they talking about politics here? What is this? What is this? A guide for living. Is that philosophy? Is philosophy just a way of thinking? A recommendation on how you should live? See, these are the vague notions we have of philosophy today. Because the issues it addresses are basic and pervasive, determining the course we take in life. Again, recommendation on how you should live, how you should think, how you should behave in order to live in a civilized society, I guess that's what they're referring to. And how we treat other people. Is that what philosophy is? How we treat other people, how you should live, how you should think, in order for society to be maybe more productive or for the world to be a better place to live in? Is that what philosophy is about? These are recommendations. This is not philosophy. Because if that's philosophy, we are all philosophers. Everybody has a way of thinking. Everybody has a recommendation how the world should be. Everybody has his own opinion about that. So we're all philosophers? What does the word philosopher mean in that context? That's the vulgar notion that we have of philosophy, that everybody's just got his way of thinking. That's Joe's philosophy. That we can't use that notion in a discussion if we're going to talk about philosophy. And of course, that's a notion that the Atlas Society had, and also that Ayn Rand had. Okay? The topics that philosophy addresses fall into several distinct fields, and here you can see that they have totally different notions for what philosophy is. It's like philosophy is everything, and it's got all these branches. The first one is metaphysics. And what is metaphysics? The theory of reality, in other words, of existence. Well, that wouldn't be a problem, except it's got two. I have two objections against that. The first one is that existence, reality, the nature, what exists belongs to physics. That's the first problem. The second problem is that they always introduce epistemology together with metaphysics. How do we know what exists? That word know is introduced there. Knowledge. How do we know what exists? And for that, they immediately introduce the senses. Sight, touch. They don't usually include hearing, taste, and sound, taste, and smell. They don't include those usually because they say, well, you don't prove God by smelling God, but you got to see and touch Him. It's that notion that people have that what exists is what you can touch and see, and yet you can't see the air and you can't touch a square. And so the question is, what are we going to do with those? Do they exist or not? For that, you need to define the word exist. And even before that, the word object, what a thing is, okay? Anyways, that's religion. Only because you introduce the observer, knowledge, consciousness, awareness, perception. That's why metaphysics is a religion, okay? I want to make sure that's clear. As soon as you introduce subjectivity, introduce an observer in any way, shape, or form with anything that exists, you are no longer talking about existence. And that has to do with the definition, which I'll go into in a second here. Epistemology, that's nonsense. Theories of knowledge, they haven't defined knowledge, but they have theories of knowledge, okay? How we know what we know usually. Ethics, what does ethics have to do with philosophy? Ethics is an opinion. Is it ethical to kill an animal? I mean, I kill animals every day. I kill flies, some bugs that crawl into my house because I have plants. So they come in, they do their thing, and sometimes on the wall, and I kill them. So I'm a murderer. Is that ethical? Maybe I should, babysit them, just grab them, and say, "Go fly, little bug, go out there." No, it's easier to get something, just whack them. So I'm a murderer. I'm an assassin. I kill animals every day, every so often, right? So is that ethical? Politics is that part of philosophy? Don't we all have our proposal for how the world should be? So that's nonsense. That's really politics is nonsense. That's why I got out of it. I finally learned my lesson. I don't do politics anymore. Just get out of it. If you're into politics, get out of it. It's religion. You'll never figure anything out. And I guess you just need, if you're still into politics, that means you still have some years ahead of you in which you got to figure it out, right? Aesthetics, art, that kind of thing, beauty, that's opinion. None of that has anything to do with philosophy. So these are not the branches of philosophy, okay? Especially if you're going to say that philosophy is a science, which is what Ayn Rand said in one of her statements. She said it's the science of, I covered that last week, okay? And no, if you're going to say that philosophy is a science, some people say the opposite. They say you have science and you have philosophy. Like one thing has nothing to do with the other. They're like alter egos, counterparts. And other people say, no, philosophy is a science or part of science. For those who say that it's part of science and use science in their definition of the word philosophy, they have to explain why it's a science. And for that, you need to define what science is to begin with before you get there. You have to start at the definition of science so that we understand what you're saying when you're saying that philosophy is a science. Okay? And none of these are sciences because none of this can be used rationally. A lot of this is just opinions or undefined terms like knowledge. So, none of this falls under the notion that we should have or the proper definition that we should have of philosophy, okay? And so here's a list of what philosophy ain't, okay? This is what philosophy is not. Philosophy cannot be a way of thinking because everybody has a way of thinking. It cannot be a belief or opinion. That's subjective. And philosophy is not supposed to be subjective if it is a science. If we're going to include it as a science, we're going to say that philosophy is a science. We cannot have belief or opinion. We got to remove the observer. Okay? Does it study existence? No, that's physics. Aesthetic, ethics, justice, consciousness, observation, recommendation, how you should live. None of that is philosophy. Okay? Are you happy? What makes you happy? No, we're not interested in all that in philosophy. Okay, so the question if none of this amounts to philosophy, what is philosophy in the alternative? That's where we have to start. Let's start at what it is instead of what it ain't. Okay, and here you have a little picture that I like to show. Okay. And we start by defining what science is. And we say science is the body of rational explanations. Okay? That's what science is. Science is rational explanations. Science is divided into two parts, physics and philosophy. What does physics do? Rational explanations of phenomena. Philosophy, rational explanations of behaviors. Okay? And so now we have it very well delineated. Physics deals with anything after you kill all of living observers in the universe. Once you kill all observers, and there's no more interference by subjectivity, what remains behind is existence. And that's what physics is going to study. Physics is going to study the motion of objects, just objective mechanisms. Okay. Philosophy, on the other hand, studies behaviors. And of course, people say, well, that's subjective. No, not really, because a behavior, why someone did something, is not subjective. You're explaining my belief of that behavior is subjective, not the behavior itself, not the explanation of that behavior. People don't always understand that, and it takes a while for people to fall in and understand that concept. Where do we put Ayn Rand? Well, we put her under epistemology, with the senses. She talked about truth, fact, knowledge, proof, evidence, consciousness, sensations, perception, and other stuff that has nothing to do with philosophy, which is a science. All that has to do with religion, with opinions and belief. Ayn Rand essentially was she was a politician. She was into politics. She wanted to tell you how we should live. She was into against collectivism, communism. She was Russian originally. She came to the United States and railed against Stalin. She didn't like all that interference. She said, that man has free will, and therefore all she did was talk about how free will should be used. She gave this notion it should be used responsibly, okay? And I'll get into that later on, but the point is that Ayn Rand dedicated all her so-called philosophy, which is just her general way of thinking, and she applied it to politics. That's what she did. So she was not a philosopher. She was a religious person. Any person who uses their so-called philosophy to tell you how the world should be run, what the best form of government is, that's opinion. That's just opinion. And that's what politics does, and that's why politics is a branch of religion, not a branch of science. There's no such thing as political science. No, it's political religion. Okay, that's what it should be called. Okay, so I give you a general picture that the notion that we have of philosophy, this notion that philosophy is simply a way of thinking, that can't be used consistently in a debate, in a discussion, in a dissertation.